HRM is the largest municipality in Nova Scotia, so of course it stands to reason that funding to increase crosswalk safety would be directed to them. However, other municipalities from Sydney to Yarmouth to Amherst have crosswalks as well. So my final question to the Minister is, what portion of the announced $300,000 will be allocated to other areas outside HRM?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Honourable Member mentioned, we have indicated that we'll commit $100,000 over the next 3 years for a total of $300,000. Mr. Speaker, that money is available for those projects in HRM, and as well, Mr. Speaker, municipalities from throughout the province can apply as well to do some cost sharing in regards to what they may perceive as issues in their own communities, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I see this as a first step in regards to crosswalk safety. It's been a real issue in this province for the last number of years. Mr. Speaker, this partnership we formed with HRM, I believe, is a real opportunity to ensure that our roads, in particular our pedestrians, are safe in regards to crosswalk safety, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. In November 2007, the All-Party Standing Committee on Community Services unanimously supported a resolution to create a working group on autism. This group would consist of professionals and advocates for persons with autism spectrum disorder to discuss meeting the needs of people with autism in Nova Scotia over their lifetime. The Minister and his colleagues in Community Services and Education know that the needs are many and lifelong. My question to the Minister, when will this working group be formed?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to ask for your clarification on this one. There is a bill before the House that was tabled by the member for Kings West pertaining to this directly. So I don't know if... I am asking the Speaker.
Well, the rules of the House state that if there is a bill before being debated, it's not supposed to be questioned in the House. So, is there a way that you can rephrase your question?
I'll just ask the next one. Can I just ask the next one?
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, the Autism Society of Nova Scotia has been told by the Minister that there will be no working group. His rationale is that there is a working group attached to the EIBI program at the IWK. But surely the Minister knows that this is a parent group limited to that particular program only. That's a far cry from the group that this Minister's colleagues supported at the committee. So I ask the Minister, will he review the Hansard from the meeting and sit down with the Autism Society to discuss the request for a working group?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have reviewed the Hansard from that meeting. Mr. Speaker, as always, we will continue to sit and meet with the partners that so care about these children and adults with this disorder.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister's own colleagues were there at the Standing Committee meeting and they voted in favour of this working group being created. If he won't listen to his own cabinet colleagues at the table, will he at least listen to the stakeholders like the Autism Societies who help families with this issue every day?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As always, we will continue to consult with all interested parties. We'll continue to consult with the community as we always have.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With reference to this working group that the Community Services Committee unanimously supported, is this Minister willing to consider a group that has professionals and advocates for persons with autism spectrum disorder to meet the needs of people with autism in their lifetime, over their lifetime, not just to age 5?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to consult. We will continue to work with the groups that are so dedicated to this cause. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to smartly invest the $4 million that we have now for that EIBI program.
The Honourable Member for Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Community Services. Neil Shan is a constituent of mine. He lives with his disabled mother and has been her sole caregiver for a number of years. Mr. Shan has had to carry his mother up and down the steps to get her in and out of the house. He applied for a grant to put in a ramp, but he was turned down because of the household income is too high. They are living on 2 small pensions. My question to the minister, why are household income thresholds too low, knowing that they are leaving many Nova Scotians out of luck getting the necessary repairs for their homes?
Good question. The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services and Housing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable colleague for the question. And though my honourable colleague knows I can't speak to specifics of any case, certainly the premise of his question regarding income levels and accessibility is a serious one, Mr. Speaker. It's one that we take very seriously. That's why we invest over $18 million, Mr. Speaker, every year in the menu of housing, repair programs, etc., that we offer across this province. And Mr. Speaker, we have those income limits in place. Some programs, Mr. Speaker, in cooperation with the Canadian Mortgage and Housing, Mr. Speaker, some provincial income levels, and Mr. Speaker, when we are able to, we increase those income levels, and we will continue to do that on an annual basis as the financial ability of the province allows us to, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Shelburne on his
Thank
first
you, Mr.
supplement.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Shan could not wait no longer so we got a loan and put on the ramp. That might sound like a small bill to you. It poses a big challenge for Mr. Shan and his mother. There are other renovations that would make it much easier to continue caring for his mother at home, but there seems to be no way to get help. My question to the minister, why don't the housing programs take disability and medical expenses into considerations when they are setting cutoff levels?
The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services and Housing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, there are a multitude of factors that we do take into consideration, Mr. Speaker. The area in which individuals or a family live, Mr. Speaker, the income levels of those individuals or families, Mr. Speaker. And again, we have raised those levels when we've been able to do so, Mr. Speaker, within the fiscal ability of our department, and we will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker, as we are able to help all Nova Scotians who are in need of our assistance, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Shelburne on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Neil Shan has saved this province tens of thousands of dollars by being his family caregiver, but he can't get just little help to make his house safe and comfortable for him and his mother. I asked the minister, why won't her government meet these families halfway and help make life easier for people like Neil Shan and his mother?
The Honourable, the Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, again, to my honourable colleague across the way, I know he raises this out of compassion for his constituents, Mr. Speaker, but again, I've indicated that the over $18 million that is spent, Mr. Speaker, on home repair programs in this province is money well spent, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to invest in those upgrades, Mr. Speaker. We recognize that aging in place is extremely important, Mr. Speaker, as is assisting persons with disabilities. And again, Mr. Speaker, when we are able to increase those household limits and we were able to increase those grants, because, Mr. Speaker, the Access a Home program, the household income levels were increased this year, Mr. Speaker, as was the quantity for the grants, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, libraries, large or small, urban or rural, help to provide a holistic learning environment for every single region across Nova Scotia. Despite the request by many regional libraries for additional funding last year, Minister and her department stood silent as many were forced to reduce operating hours, slash community programs, and cut off of staff. After months of inaction, the Minister finally responded to cries of regional libraries and announced a task force to examine the current funding formula. My question to the Minister, Why didn't the minister show a more timely response and provide financial aid to regional libraries last fall?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the member opposite, the question of libraries and library funding was certainly asked last year. As a result of that, I've met with the regional library boards and listened to their concerns. They have fairly legitimate concerns about funding. The formula that's currently being used does not appear to be addressing the needs, and as a result of that, there is now a new funding formula review committee that is doing their work, fair representation from a lot of the boards across the province, and their report to me is expected in June. Thank you.
The Honourable the Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the monies for libraries provided in this year's budget arrived 10 months too late. Regional libraries have publicly asked this government for additional resources June 2007, not May 2008. Mr. Speaker, many libraries, such as Cape Breton, Cumberland, Pictou, Antigonish, and Western Region, are just a few of the libraries that have been put into crisis mode due to a lack of provincial funding. As a result of this government's neglect, many libraries have been forced into cost-saving measures, such as reducing hours of operation, halting book orders, cutting staff work hours, and even cancelling beneficial preschool reading programs. My question to the minister, will the minister allow regional libraries to close their doors to the public, or will this government show leadership and provide funding for the real requirement for libraries?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased, Mr. Speaker, to say that in our base funding for last year, we increased the dollars to library boards by $1 million. This year, in the proposed budget that's before the House, we have increased it by another $500,000, and we will be looking at a new formula come June.
The Honourable the Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We just hope that regional libraries, don't get caught up like gas regulation, stagnant tourism revenue, and the Atlantic Accord. Mr. Speaker, the Pictou Antigonish Regional Library has been forced to make many educational sacrifices to their community. In November 2007, while government delayed its response to the library funding crisis, Pictou Antigonish was forced to stop ordering books. Many more services in all regional libraries were cut. And more will be cut if government does not provide them with additional resources they need to provide community programs. My question to the minister, why is the minister forcing regional libraries to stop book orders, cut early learning programs across the province?
The Honourable the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I want to acknowledge that the excellent work that's done by the 9 library boards and the 77 sites across the province, we value that. It is certainly an integral part of the communities in which those libraries exist, and that's why we want to work with the library boards to make sure that they can identify a funding formula that will meet their needs, and we will respond.
The Honourable the Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. We can all agree that Nova Scotia faces road infrastructure deficit. This is especially true in rural Nova Scotia, where people are dependent upon our secondary highways to get to work, to get our children to school safely, and to maintain the small business opportunities in our communities. Mr. Speaker, with the growing deterioration of our secondary highway infrastructure, can this minister tell us, after 9 years in power, why our secondary roads are a low priority for this government?
The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. Mr. Speaker, the member is wrong. Roads in this, as I said earlier, this government, Mr. Speaker, in the last 9 years have quadrupled the number of dollars being spent annually in capital. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this government faces huge challenges. Every time the gas goes up in this province, petroleum, Mr. Speaker, up goes the cost in regards to repaving and resurfacing of roads. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to point out, on one moment, the NDP wants to rebuild all the road beds, which would mean probably $1 million per kilometre, Mr. Speaker. The next minute, Mr. Speaker, they want us to pave all the gravel roads in Nova Scotia. Now, Mr. Speaker, asking us why we're putting secondary roads behind, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you can't have it both ways. All the NDP want to do, Mr. Speaker, is tax and spend. tax and spend. You know, Mr. Speaker, you can't have it both ways. Mr. Speaker, we are doing a good job in regards to rebuilding the roads and problems, and I'm proud of the job this government's doing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Queens on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this minister is giving us a lot of rhetoric here. This government has had 9 years in power to really seriously look at our secondary roads. Our secondary roads. I have written this to...
Order, please. Order. The member for Queens has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, our secondary roads are vital gateways into our rural communities, and I've written this minister and his department several times over the past 2 years regarding road issues that have been brought to me. I've tabled petitions in this House outlining concerns of local residents, and I've personally driven over many of these secondary roads. Mr. Speaker, in 2001, the department had a plan with its 10-year needs study. How close is this minister to completing this plan?
The Honourable, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Mr. Speaker, every MLA in this legislature can talk about roads in their own constituency. I can, Mr. Speaker. I've got roads in my own constituency. I just wish this government had the dollars to do them all, but we don't, Mr. Speaker. We don't. You know, Mr. Speaker, I've sat in this legislature with the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition for 10 years, and not once, Mr. Speaker, not one time I've ever heard the Honourable member say to a group, to an organization, to a community, to an individual, that we can't do everything for everybody, Mr. Speaker. It can't be done. And Mr. Speaker, we're doing a great job with the money we have. Mr. Speaker, we are paving roads in this province. Unprecedented in this province, Mr. Speaker. This government's doing a good job, Mr. Speaker. But again, spend, as all these people want to do, tax and spend, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Queens on her final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the residents of Port Medway, Vugler's Cove, West Caledonia, Westfield, Southwest Port Mattoon, and Italy Cross have been waiting far too long for improvements to what they see as vital gateways between their communities. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, after 9 years, why are these rural gateways continuing to crumble?
The Honourable, the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Mr. Speaker, I think the record of this government speaks well for itself. You know, from $40-some million, Mr. Speaker, when we came into power, the last year, $145 million, Mr. Speaker, in regards to capital in this province. Mr. Speaker, we are partnering with the federal government in regards to infrastructure on our bridges and highways, Mr. Speaker, on the 100 series. And Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to put large amounts of resource into our highway system that have been neglected, Mr. Speaker, for so many years.
The Honourable, the member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Agriculture. Well, Mr. Speaker, once again it's spring, and once again I'm here to ask a question about the Conservative government's lack of attention to one of the most important industries we used to have in agriculture, the hog industry. A few weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, the Premier and his government went hog wild on spending for the province, and we saw meagre support for the beef industry, nothing for the hog industry. My question to the Minister, why does the agriculture industry continue to suffer under your government's lack of action to aid these primary industries?
The Honourable, the Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, through you to the Honourable Member, I would like to inform him that just this morning the Honourable Member for Kings North, the Minister of Environment, convened a meeting in his constituency office where we had, in fact, the Chairman of Pork Nova Scotia bringing forward some concerns. And, in fact, we are working with the pork industry in the province of Nova Scotia. And quite frankly, again, I think it's worth repeating, while we brought in our 7th balanced budget as well, we are putting more into agriculture than any province in Atlantic Canada. We're investing in agriculture. We're investing in pork. Thank you.
The Honourable, the member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, the federal Conservative government made an announcement to pay pork producers $50 million to slaughter 150,000 hogs across the country. This announcement is too little, too late for many farmers in Nova Scotia. My question to the Minister, what conversations have you had in recent months with your federal cousins to try and secure funding and move the November date further back?
The Honourable, the Minister of Agriculture.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to inform the honourable member that we have spoken with the Honourable Jerry Ritz, the Federal Minister of Agriculture. We have asked, in fact, that hog cull program be retroactive back to September because, in fact, we recognize that this is a national problem right across this country, and we took the lead here in Nova Scotia, worked with the pork producers. We provided funding through direct assistance. We provided traditional money, and we will continue, in fact, to work with our federal cousins in Ottawa to help that industry. That, in fact, is struggling, but it's a national problem.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I just want to get the minister on the record to confirm that those exiting with the huge loans won't lose their home in the process.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, I made a commitment, in fact, to the honourable member for Clare on that same point, and he
Order,
can consult.
please. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Central Kings Canadian History Grade 11 class with their leaders Greg Milne and Maggie Milne. Half the class is here, the other half has gone down to the Maritime Museum, and they're here to observe the House, and they're able to observe question period, which is one of the more exciting times. So I'd ask them to rise and the House to give them a warm welcome.
The Honourable Member for Richmond on an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And today in the gallery, on both sides of the gallery, we have a number of correctional workers that are here from facilities throughout Nova Scotia. As I'm sure you saw today, Speaker, concerns were raised during question period, and they're here to have the opportunity to raise those issues directly with members and certainly directly with the Premier, the Minister, and with the government. So I would ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition on an introduction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was actually my introduction, but I just want to join in welcoming you to the House. Thank you.
The Honourable, the Liberal House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you call Bill 119?
Bill 119. The Honourable, the Member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place to debate Bill number 119, the Health Act. Mr. Speaker, this is a common sense bill that will in the future secure the supply of physicians to underserviced communities in this province. And Mr. Speaker, the issue of recruitment of physicians to underserviced communities in this province has been a challenge for some time. The Minister of Health, the current Minister of Health, knows that. Ministers of Health before him know that. And, well, we'll see if ministers to come will know that or not, Mr. Speaker. But let me say much of the focus has been on recruiting doctors to underserviced areas through incentives and debt relief. And, Mr. Speaker, this focus needs to continue to ensure that family physicians who need to choose either an area such as Digby or an area such as Glace Bay or Bridgetown, they need to choose those communities to practice in instead of Toronto, Ottawa, or, for instance, Oakville. Mr. Speaker, this bill acknowledges that with the rising costs of tuition, recruitment will become even more challenging as potential doctors decide whether they can afford to enter medical school in the first place. A national physician survey that was released last week revealed that high tuition costs are a major factor in determining whether otherwise highly qualified students will actually enter med school. And Mr. Speaker, more than a third of those students who participated in that 2007 questionnaire we're expecting their debt load from going to med school to exceed $80,000. Mr. Speaker, a debt load from med school alone does not factor in the undergraduate degree that's required to apply to medical school as well. Most undergraduate degrees, I would suggest, are in the vicinity of perhaps $40-some thousand these days. So if you put the two of those together, you can see a rather staggering debt load that med schools are facing once they complete their education. All of these issues, Mr. Speaker, raise concerns over whether there are some brilliant students out there, especially those from rural communities, perhaps from Aboriginal communities, Mr. Speaker, or black communities, that could even afford to train as doctors. Mr. Speaker, this bill, Bill number 119, gives those students some hope. This bill also gives underserviced communities some hope as well. Hope that there will be a future supply of 20 physicians available to establish practices in these communities, whenever those communities may be in 4 years or 5 years. Mr. Speaker, we know today the communities who are struggling to find physicians. Let me give you some examples, Mr. Speaker. Bridgetown requires 2 physicians. Kingston Greenwood area requires 2 physicians. Berwick requires 2 physicians. There's 1 required in Lordways. There are 3 required in Dartmouth, 1 in Halifax, 1 in Hantsport, 1 in Mineville, 1 in Musquodoboit Harbour, 1 in Musquodoboit Valley, 1 in Sheet Harbour. I'm not finished. There are 2 required in Bridgewater, 1 in Chester Basin, and there are opportunities in Lunenburg and Chester. Pictou County needs 4 doctors. Digby requires 3. Lockport 1. Shelburne 1. Yarmouth 2. I'm still not finished. This will give you an indication of the problem. There are 2 in the Tuscan, Argyll, Pubnico region. The minister should find that very interesting. There are 2 in Amherst. There's 1 in Pugwash and 1 in Spring Hill, Mr. Speaker. That'll give you an indication of the communities that require physicians as of today, even as we speak. And certainly, my own community in Cape Breton, and Cape Breton in general, is not without its challenges, Mr. Speaker. Let me elaborate for a moment on my own community of Glace Bay. Just recently, I had a conversation with a couple of residents in Glace Bay, a couple of constituents, who told me that there have been at least 2 doctors that have left the area in Glace Bay. I've yet to have that confirmed by the Cape Breton District Health Complex, I should say, Mr. Speaker, but we're working on getting that confirmation. But these doctors that have supposedly left the area were family doctors, family physicians, and as we all know, family physicians do perform tasks such as refilling or filling out prescriptions for refills for prescriptions. One of the people who called me, Mr. Speaker, said that they were having a problem getting referred to another doctor in order to get a prescription that was required to treat him for diabetes, Mr. Speaker. And in order to get that diabetes prescription refilled, he had to go to the emergency room in Glace Bay and sit for a 6-hour period in order to see a doctor to simply write out a prescription to get his medication refilled, Mr. Speaker. And another constituent who called me said that her husband, his doctor left the area, Mr. Speaker. Her husband is on dialysis and needs dialysis 3 times a week, but now he has no family doctor. Mr. Speaker, she was very concerned about that. Not that the fact her husband wasn't getting the proper treatment in terms of dialysis, he still is, but she was very concerned of the fact that, along with any other ailments that might come about, he is not able to see a family doctor any longer, Mr. Speaker. And another constituent wrote me back some time ago that one of the doctors, and the email, Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to table this email after I'm finished with it. One of the doctors in Glace Bay was leaving at the end of the month, and there would not be a doctor replacing that doctor, and no other doctors in town were taking on new patients. And this particular person who wrote this email, constituent, said, "We cannot find another doctor. There is a walk-in clinic that's open in Sydney in the evenings, but it's only open from 5 until 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening." And she was concerned as a patient who is not seriously ill, has no serious illness, but requires what she referred to as a continuity in her health care due to her medical condition, that she was concerned. And when she was considered that those that are in much worse shape physically, she said she was alarmed, and she was worried about the strain that the lack of doctors would put on the local ER department when it's open, Mr. Speaker, and she wanted to point that out, when it's open, because we have a frequency of ER closures in Glace Bay and surrounding areas. But she was afraid that the strain it would put on them, causing longer waits and often for little more than prescriptions and referrals, as I indicated. And the writer of this email wanted me to bring this to the attention of the Premier and those having responsibility for the health and well-being of the population of not just Glace Bay, but all of Nova Scotia. And, Mr. Speaker, I would table that email now. Mr. Speaker, we are not, I don't think we are anyway, naive enough to assume that this bill will solve everything and that government and future governments can say that our work is simply done in this field. It's not. But this bill is a longer-term solution, we believe, to an immediate problem. It is only one tool, Mr. Speaker, that is there to address the issues around physician recruitment in underserviced communities as well. There is much that needs to be done, Mr. Speaker, to capture a new class of medical graduates that are going to receive their degrees over the next couple of weeks. It was just a few days ago, Mr. Speaker, that I read with great interest in the Chronicle Herald an article there from a medical student by the name of Tarek Isaac, who is a resident of Glace Bay. He comes from Glace Bay. And he was quite concerned as a medical student as to what was being done with recruitment of doctors, and quite concerned. And I've talked to a number of medical students at Dalhousie University, Mr. Speaker. To my surprise, none of the students that I spoke with have been approached directly by anyone to recruit them to stay in this province and to stay in rural areas of this province. I found that amazing, Mr. Speaker. I found that amazing that they hadn't been approached directly, and I would have hoped that they would have said, look, we can't just simply keep them away from our doors. There's too many recruiters in Nova Scotia, and they're continuously hassling me, will you please locate in Nova Scotia, we're going to do this for you, we're going to do that for you, please stay here. In a couple of cases, it was their home province. And we know, Mr. Speaker, that we have to be, we need to be, and we should be proactive in this situation. We should be aggressive in this situation, because unless we are, those students are not going to stay in Nova Scotia. Those students are not going to be interested in staying in this province and locating in rural areas where they are desperately needed, Mr. Speaker. So we need this bill to provide the stability to the underserviced communities, not just now, but especially down the road. And it would give, we feel, some otherwise very bright students some hope that they're going to be able to pursue their passion, not only of obtaining a medical degree, but a review of what's being offered now, whether it's working, whether we can do things better, what needs to be done. Again, that more solutions are required. And Mr. Speaker, we feel that this bill would be a huge step forward. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are glad to hear the minister stand in this House today, and we were pleased to hear what the minister had to say about establishing new seats at Dalhousie Medical School. And we do feel that it is a step in the right direction. I think the minister knows that we would have liked to have seen perhaps a little bit more. You can't always get everything that you want, Mr. Speaker, but we do realize that the minister, and I will say this, for the first time in 9 years, this minister from this government is at least starting to pay attention to some of the things that we're saying In the past, Mr. Speaker, what we've suggested has been totally ignored. Not surprisingly, Mr. Speaker, not surprisingly that we're in the mess that we're in today because of that. But we know, Mr. Speaker, that by working together in this minority government situation, that perhaps we can make things change for the better, Mr. Speaker. And again, we're not naive enough to know or think that we have all of the answers to solve everything, and that we're going to suggest to government that this be the only answer. What we're suggesting to government in this case, Mr. Speaker, is that we have a good piece of legislation, a piece of legislation that deserves their attention, and we think, Mr. Speaker, ultimately, in the long run, that this bill, and hopefully through this debate today, and from other speakers that we'll hear shortly, Mr. Speaker, that at the end of the day, at the end of this discussion, the Minister and the government will understand that this bill not only deserves their attention, but this bill deserves a commitment from this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, very pleased to rise today to speak about Private Member Bill number 119. My government is deeply committed to improving access to doctors in our province. And the member opposite spoke very well about the requirements for doctors in our rural areas. And Mr. Speaker, I can also say to the member opposite that we too get the phone calls and the visits to our constituency offices with people that do not have doctor coverage. Mr. Speaker, I can also say, though, that we are still very well represented here in Nova Scotia, and I will get to some of those comments later on. We are equally committed to encouraging more Nova Scotians to enter healthcare professions and to improve access to medical school and other training opportunities for students. While we agree with the intent behind this bill, we do not feel it is the right approach for Nova Scotia. Each new Nova Scotia medical student that is added requires a significant amount of infrastructure, logistic and financial support. And with that in mind, we must consider the ability of our medical school to support new students when considering any strategy. Earlier today, I was pleased to announce that we will be adding 10 new undergraduate medical seats at Dalhousie University for Nova Scotian students, 5 in the fall of 2008 and 5 in the fall of 2009. And Mr. Speaker, I wish I could have gone and said there was going to be 10 available this year, but there is a matter of infrastructure at the Dalhousie Medical School. This will bring the total complement, I believe, to somewhere near 95, which does pretty much fill up the school. So there has to be some time for them to address that infrastructure requirement for those medical students. Now, the intent of this program that I announced today is to increase the supply of family doctors to Nova Scotia. And we know that potential medical students want the option to be trained right here in their own province. And these new 10 seats will be reserved for Nova Scotians only, as I mentioned before. In addition, we'll provide tuition support for these students, who in turn will set up practice in Nova Scotia upon graduation. Mr. Speaker, I can say that the other option that we want to look at is that once we know that the full complement of family physicians is taken care of, that we can react and change the requirements to maybe look at other deficiencies within the system, whether it be for internist or ENT or whatever the specialty might be. But right now our focus will be on general practice on family medicine. Mr. Speaker, also to be considered in this discussion is the issue of the New Brunswick seats that will be coming available in the next number of years. I know the target that had been set originally by the government of New Brunswick, as well as the Dalhousie Medical School, was to have a medical school set up and operational in New Brunswick and St. John, I believe by 2009-2010. I know with discussions with the medical school, with of course Dr. Harold Cook, who is the Dean of Medicine there, that the negotiations, even though they're still ongoing, that now without a final decision, that starts to get pushed off into the future. So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, I still cannot commit that those 20 seats will be available to Nova Scotia on that 09-010 original date. So, Mr. Speaker, we will keep the House apprised of the situation as things come along, as the deal with New Brunswick becomes closer and closer to reality. Now, as I said earlier, we're already doing comparatively well in regards to the number of family doctors per capita in Nova Scotia. Now, we know that 95% of Nova Scotians have access. They may not be using that access, but have access to a regular family physician, as compared to the national average of 86%. Mr. Speaker, this is, of course, an issue that we find right across the country. In places like Ontario, the number, of course, is actually worse than that 86%. So, of course, we wish them well in their issues, but we need to address those issues here at home. This initiative will ensure that we continue to grow and improve upon that success. This, however, is not only to increase in medical students training seats. I'll try this again. This, however, is not only the increase in medical student training seats in Nova Scotia. Included in this year's budget is also the funding for 9 new residency seats at Dalhousie. Previously, seats at Dalhousie was also increased by 8. And the other caveat that we want to put on this as an interim measure is to be able to offer residency seats to those individuals who are from Nova Scotia who have decided, or because of not being able to accepted to the medical program here at Dalhousie, but had to go elsewhere in order to get their medical training in places around the world, whether it be Hungary, whether it be the island of Saba, whether it be somewhere in the U.S., to be able to give an opportunity for these individuals to come back home to get their residencies, to get their final training here in Nova Scotia in order for them to practice here. Now, training doctors enter these new residency positions under the agreement that they will practice in Nova Scotia after graduation. So again, more return for service in our system. Training more doctors through the introduction of new medical school seats is important, but so too is the retention and recruitment of these physicians as they become available to us. Now, I'm pleased to say that Nova Scotia is still able to replace any doctor who is leaving and increase our overall numbers. And we've been able to improve the number of doctors practicing in rural areas, as well as increase those graduating from our medical program. However, we also know that as competition for precious human health resources continues to grow, so too must our efforts to make Nova Scotia even more appealing to doctors. We are doing so through a combination of competitive compensation and a number of programs and initiatives that each support the districts and our partners. Mr. Chair, I apologize for that again. Monsieur le Président, we are at job fairs. We were at the Dalhousie Job Fair, offering positions to medical students here in Nova Scotia. We end up in all places around Canada as these job fairs come available in order to talk to the medical students who are at various medical schools across Canada. So trying our best to twist their arms and get them to come to Nova Scotia. And I know that hand in hand are the department, the DHAs, and the communities to try to entice these so needed human health resources to come to our communities. Now, Nova Scotia has the highest percentage of alternate payment plans of all provinces. Of course, you're going to ask, well, what does that have to do with it? But it has a lot to do with it. These agreements are on the leading edge of physician remuneration, and they are very appealing to doctors. Several alternate funding contracts are available to physicians in Nova Scotia. In the community, these are available to physicians in areas with specific challenges or where doctors are working in collaborative practices. They're also available for physicians working in academic settings. Since 2005, the CAP program has helped 23 international medical candidates start practice in rural communities. A number of seats at Dalhousie University already have return for service commitments in the province. Actually, I want to go back to the IMG issue, of course, CAP. And I want to talk about the success that we are having in the Yarmouth area when it comes to those international medical graduates. A couple of years ago, through the leadership of our Premier, the leadership of Dr. Sheila, set forth a program to create a clinic where residents of Yarmouth could come to under the supervision of the doctor and train 3 new medical students, 3 new medical international medical graduates. And Mr. Speaker, I can say that these individuals who have been trained under that auspice moved out of the training as they became fully licensed doctors in Nova Scotia and moved into the community, and now working at the Harbour South Clinic under the auspices of Dr. Roland Muse. And Mr. Speaker, I can say this is working very well for the community of Yarmouth and the surrounding area, and one that we would want to replicate around Nova Scotia. But I can also say that even though there was a lot of discussion around this and a lot of hope that there was many more of these international medical graduates sort of hanging around doing other jobs until they could get their further training to work in Nova Scotia, we have only been able to really get 23 through that system yet, and the demand for those IMG seats is actually diminishing. So we do hope that we can find more of these individuals who can be trained up in some cases in a year or 2 years in order to work in the medical system here in Nova Scotia, and more particularly anywhere in Canada. A number of seats at Dalhousie University, as I said, already have return for service. We provide reallocation allowances for physicians moving to areas who have significant needs. The community of Digby is a good example of having all those options available to them to get a doctor to relocate. Relocation allowances are supplemented through a site visit program for physicians interested in practicing in specific locations where need has been identified. Basically, study tours where we do have the opportunity to take a couple of medical students or a couple of trained doctors to show them different parts of Nova Scotia that require doctors to be practicing. And in a lot of cases, when they have the opportunity to see a community, to see the people in a community, they make a decision much more readily and do move into some of these areas. So that's a very good program, I believe, that we do have in our department. We have a debt assistant plan. We offer 3 levels of debt assistance to physicians who have recently completed their residencies. Of course, there's a rural locum program that provides minimum income guarantees, living expenses, and mileage reimbursement for those family physicians and specialists covering vacations and other needs in the community across the province. We have the Summer Rural Preceptor Program, which is a summer program for second-year medical students. It allows them to work side by side with family practitioners in rural areas. So another way to sort of get them to see what the rural life is, to see what rural practice means, and hopefully entice them to set up their own practices or work collaboratively with the physician they got to mentor them. We, of course, provide bursaries with return for service commitments for psychiatry residents at Dalhousie University. And we do spend a lot of time talking about the requirement for family medicine or general practice to come to this province, but we do have other vacancies that need to be filled. Psychiatry is one of the biggest ones we need to continue to fill in this province. And I know that with this return for service commitment, with the bursary, that we have been making inroads, but there's still too many positions that are available. And we have dollars in this year's budget to address some of our mental health wait times, but until we have physicians, these psychiatrists in place, we will still always be behind the curve just a little bit. We also support continuing medical education through alternative funding contracts and Doctors Nova Scotia in order to continue find locums to replace individuals as they go off to further their training, to offer more services to the area. We fund benefits and retirement programs for all physicians through Doctors Nova Scotia. And through our Reentry to Practice program, family physicians who have been practicing within the province for 2 years can train in specialty residency programs. Why not take these family medicine individuals who are working in our communities and train them to go work in our ERs on a on-call basis, to have more backup, if you will, for those individuals practicing in our ERs. And as we move forward, we're also looking at additional ways to achieve our objectives, whether that be through web advertising, website availability, whether that be through more traditional types of advertising through the paper, through TV, what have you. We are looking at all our options to be able to do that. As we move forward and renegotiate the physician master agreement with Doctors Nova Scotia, we are continuing to look for opportunities to ensure that Nova Scotia becomes an even more attractive place to practice medicine. And Mr. Speaker, I can say that talking to doctors, why don't they do things or why can't they do things? a lot of time they talk about the master agreement and the dollars that are available to them to do things like visit our long-term care facilities in order to care for those patients in those facilities. And there's actually a monetary disincentive to do those things sometimes when you're on a fee-for-service, for instance. You know, if a physician is on a fee-for-service working in his office, he basically has to give up a couple of hours, so that could mean 10 or 20 patients depending on their load, to go and see maybe a couple of patients at a long-term care facility. So there is a disincentive to that, and I can say that the master agreement will take some of those issues in place and understand that. Mr. Speaker, as a part of that as well, is taking into consideration the transformation document, the transformation of our healthcare system, and what is going to be required of these individuals going into the future. So together, the province and its partners are finding ways to meet the changing healthcare needs of our province, the challenges we face, through creative approach, working with our partners. We're establishing new ways to work together and to do business, and we're assuring that the health of Nova Scotian comes first. Mr. Speaker, again, I am very happy to have made my announcement today on those extra seats. They'll be going to the Dal Med School. Again, the 5 that are going in this year, the 5 that will follow them next year, and of course the incremental increase that will happen as those first years become second years and moving on to their profession. And I look forward to those individuals to be trained up and ready to go in 6 years to work in our rural areas. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to Bill 119.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to stand in the House today to talk about, I think, one of the most important key components to the solution to some of our problems we see here in Nova Scotia around the recruitment, retention of healthcare providers, specifically medical doctors and physicians here in Nova Scotia. I support the premise of Bill 119, and I think it's a good step that we're here debating, we're talking about the need for encouraging, supporting students in Nova Scotia to obtain the ability to attend medical school here in Nova Scotia. And it's and I said it earlier, it's ironic we're debating this bill now, just prior to the session today, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Education announced his intentions to support 5 additional medical seats here at Dalhousie and 5 next year, which is great. And I said in my comments earlier today, it's about time that we hear initiatives like this coming from the government, Mr. Speaker. And I've said it before and we'll say it again. I mean, it's been 9 long years for this government, who were elected on by some of the promises from Dr. John Hamm that they would fix health care. And in 1999, when they were elected, Mr. Speaker, they recognized that there was going to be a shortage of physicians, especially in rural communities. They should be well aware of it. The majority of the government's made up of rural MLAs. They know the pressures on the communities they represent, and especially on the pressures of the doctors that work in those communities, Mr. Speaker. We know, ironically, here's a bill from the Liberal Party that they did cut health care and slash health care in the 90s, Mr. Speaker, and we're still feeling the effects of that. And it's interesting to see this piece of legislation come here today, and I hope that with any future announcements that the government have, and I hope that with the announcement that they made this morning, that they made some consultation. They talked to those who this piece of legislation or the initiatives the government going to go forward with, who those individuals are affected by. And I mean the students, the medical students that we have here in the province today. I know when the member from Glace Bay or the Liberal Party said they were going to bring this forward today, we made several calls to try to see what the medical students today, the class of 2008, feel about this initiative. And Mr. Speaker, we were enlightened that really for students who are working or studying today in the medical field, Mr. Speaker, that the students that are there now, that there was little interest from those students that they would agree to a free tuition for service deal. So the fact is that they would talk to or make an agreement with the government to be told where to go. Because one of the things they said is that they need support. They need the support of tuition because tuition is so high here in this province. Because the tuition is not just the only issue, Mr. Speaker. Medical doctors want to be able to practice where they can. And they're limited. And they also told us, Mr. Speaker, that 40 to 50% of the students would take up the option of getting tuition support, but as long as there wasn't any real directive of you have to go here or you have to practice here. They still want to be able to make those determinations, Mr. Speaker, throughout their training in the medical field, Mr. Speaker. But increasing the number of rural doctors is so important, and it's been an issue across the country, not only here in Nova Scotia. But the key, I think, to increasing these numbers are ensuring that there's interested students from rural communities able to obtain that training. So what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, is that rural communities, students who live in rural Nova Scotia, for example, need to have the opportunity to get into the medical schools. And I've heard, and I'm sure other members of the House have heard, Mr. Speaker, that that is very difficult. It's very hard for a student to get into medical school. And I just don't understand why it has taken so long from this government that we're finally seeing some support in that area. We don't know what the plan is or what the government's plan is, Mr. Speaker, because of course we were never provided with one. The minister this morning said that they're going to be working on it over the next little while. But I would think with an initiative like this that maybe they would have been consultated or consultation would have happened in the rural communities to find out from high school students, for example, maybe, what their intentions are when they graduate, or from university students who are from rural communities. That's easy to find out. What are their expectations when they finish their degree and maybe want to apply to med school next year or in the coming years, Mr. Speaker? And I have to say, we see that in the next year there'll be 5 additional seats, 5 seats next year, Mr. Speaker. But if this government made this initiative in 1999, we'd have some maybe 50, if not 60 medical doctors trained today in this province that could be servicing Nova Scotians. And we know that if they're from Nova Scotia, the majority of them will stay in Nova Scotia. So here's a prime number of physicians that if we would have seen this piece of legislation, that the government would have supported, or initiative like the minister announced this morning, that we'd have some 50 to 60 physicians in our province, hopefully practicing, some in rural communities. That's why I want to emphasize the fact that I don't know what the regulations or the guidelines will be with this new initiative from the government, but I hope that they address the need to ensure that rural communities are at the forefront of this, Mr. Speaker, and ensuring that students from rural communities have access to training so that they can go back and practice in the rural communities, Mr. Speaker. And it's not only us who's talking about increasing the number of rural seats. There was recently a report in the medical journal, Canadian Medical Journal in January, just about that issue, Mr. Speaker, and it talked about what is needed to increase the number of physicians in rural communities. And they say you need to increase number of medical students from rural areas, which I talked about, more rural undergraduate medical education, and rural-focused postgraduate training. That's so important that when we have a young student who is being trained, that they're exposed and that they're allowed to experience the rural medicine portion of medical or physicians' workload, Mr. Speaker. That's so important. It was important in my training as a paramedic. When we did our practicums, one practicum was in a rural setting and one was in an urban setting. So that as a paramedic, you can see both settings, and hopefully, and I think part of the reason why was that they knew there was a need for paramedics in rural communities, and there's still a need. And it's so important, and they've been successful in encouraging rural students to enter the paramedicine field, Mr. Speaker, and we're starting to see rural communities having a complement number of paramedics, and the same thing has to happen with medical doctors, Mr. Speaker. The other thing that and I'll table this later for the House, the other thing the article talked about was improving financial incentives for rural practice. And we see this happening now currently in Digby, for example, where the municipality, the community themselves, came up with an incentive package and are trying to entice physicians to go to that part of the province, Mr. Speaker. And but what else they've mentioned? The other issues here in the article, Mr. Speaker, was around the community involvement and support, which is so important to someone who's making a decision to practice in rural communities. They need to know that that community supports them. They need to know that that community has the capacity to hopefully allow that physician, that person, their family to live there, to work there, to enjoy the additional downtime and recreational facilities that anybody would expect anywhere, Mr. Speaker, and also stable rural group practices with appropriate facilities and health care teams, like collaborative practices. What doctors want, especially if you're going to try to get them to go to rural areas, is that they don't want to be on call 24 hours a day. They don't want to be on call 7 days a week. They want to ensure that they have time off, that they can have time with their families, that they can take some time off to maybe upgrade, go to a conference, get additional training. That's the important part, Mr. Speaker. And when it comes to the seats, and the minister mentioned in his time here talking about Bill 119, was the fact that now we're going to see the infrastructure needs of our schools if we increase the number of seats there. And I agree with them completely. We just finished estimates over the last couple days, health estimates, Mr. Speaker, and I was surprised that during those estimates that consistently I could look at a line under the health budget and we realize and recognize that the government has underspent in certain areas, like pharmacare, grants and contributions under the pharmacare program, Mr. Speaker. $7 million there. $8 million for the grants and contributions under medical equipment, Mr. Speaker. $13 million underspent in grants and contributions for medical infrastructure. So just in those three line items, Mr. Speaker, there was $28 million. So why doesn't the minister take that $28 million and support our educational facilities in this province to ensure that we have enough seats to train the doctors? And I questioned the minister on this earlier, around the fact that we have students here in Nova Scotia who want to be trained in the medical field. They want to. And it was in the paper just last week in the Daily in Truro, Mr. Speaker, where there was a young grade 12 student who was frustrated because because she wanted to work as an ultrasound technician here in the province, applied to the program, straight A student, Mr. Speaker, but was told that she's on a wait list. But what frustrated this young student was the fact that the CEO of the Colchester East Hants Health Authority, Peter McKinnon, was in the paper stating that they wanted to create a bursary to entice young students from that area to attend medical school, especially around ultrasound and the other technologist courses, Mr. Speaker. I mean, no wonder the students are leaving our province after they're being educated. They're not getting the help. They're not getting the support they need here in this province. So, for example, this young student, she doesn't know what she's going to do next year. She's going to go off and try something else in school. And we've just lost an individual who's from a rural part of this province, who wanted to be trained, who would meet the needs of the community. And I know that that's happening throughout all the professions, including medical doctors, Mr. Speaker. We have so many young students here in the province who are smart, articulate, who would want to get the training to become medical doctors, but just can't. There's not enough seats. So the government needs to ensure that if there's a demand, here we have a government recently saying that we have too many teachers being trained, so they're going to cut back the number of seats for teachers. Well, we don't have enough medical people being trained, so why aren't we increasing those seats? We need to increase them more than what the government is saying they're going to do over the next how many years? Mr. Speaker. They've had 9 years to try to address this. And it's not just about medical doctors, it's about nurses, it's about lab technologists, it's about x-ray technologists, it's about nuclear medicine technologists. In all the fields, Mr. Speaker, there's wait lists. Wait lists for people who want to be trained in this province to work in the medical field. And that blows me away that we can't capture those individuals and ensure that they stay here. If we train a Nova Scotian student here in the medical fields, they're more likely to stay here. The government has said this time and time again. The minister likes saying that. So why are we allowing them to decide on other careers when we have wait lists for enrollment in medical fields? Like radiology technology, 13 seats available, there's almost 40 people waiting. Nuclear medicine, there's only 8 seats available, 18 people waiting. And I mentioned ultrasound where there's 5 seats. There's 40 people waiting, even though the young lady I mentioned said she was 90 on a wait list, Mr. Speaker. That, in my calculations, is just unreal, and I don't understand why we're not putting more emphasis on the fact that we need to train more healthcare providers, and that the facilities that do that need the support from this government, and they need it today, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the honourable member from Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and very pleased to rise in my place today and speak on Bill 119. I know that the minister has made a very significant announcement here today, but I think it's still important to talk about what the announcement means and some of the background relating to why Bill 119 came before the legislature. There's no question that for the long term, this is one part of a strategy, an action plan, a solution-driven approach to a problem that has plagued and continues to be of major concern to rural Nova Scotia, and that is the availability of a family physician. We've heard on many occasions in this House numbers, in particular communities. It's not a 100% problem across Nova Scotia, but rather it's primarily a rural problem. So I think this announcement to provide the places at the Dal Medical School for 10 positions for family practice is a very, very significant step forward. We know long overdue. So I think these targeted positions are going to go indeed a long way to solving a problem which has been very, very difficult, and one that many families have had to struggle with, not having a family doctor. I guess the real caveat here will be targeting these students and having them commit for a period of time to Nova Scotia and to communities without a family doctor. 2 examples where this has been very, very successful, of course, are the military community and also Northern Ontario. Now, the military community has had a long-standing history of the med students that they provide their tuition for. There is a requirement of a number of years that they will commit to the military, and not necessarily to an actual community from the outset. Just where their need is across the country, if they have provided the financial assistance. And we know that financial assistance has become a greater requirement. We've heard now of med students coming out and having a 6-figure debt. So by targeting students that will be trained in Nova Scotia and then go to our communities or have them make a commitment to rural communities is very, very positive indeed. Northern Ontario found that they were having extreme difficulty in recruiting doctors to small towns, mining communities around the northern part of the Canadian Shield, Northern Ontario. So I found out about this through actually one of my former students at West Kings District High School, who is currently a med student at Dalhousie. And he gave me a paper that he had prepared because I had been asking him whether or not he was going to return to the community where he grew up. And I said, you know, Nova Scotia and other parts of the country are having great difficulty in attracting doctors to rural communities because number one, the competition for doctors, you know, is indeed extreme right across the country and in other jurisdictions as well. So in this paper, he showed how in Northern Ontario, after students had finished their BSc, their basic science program, had applied to go to med school in, of course, southern parts of Ontario, to the universities there, and upon acceptance, they were approached with financial assistance, tuition support, if they would return to northern communities for a period of time. So what they did was they targeted students in particular that had come from the northern part of Ontario who were now in med school and who wanted financial support, and then in return going back to those communities to work. So we know that the connection that is made with the announcement today and some of the future solution for medical doctors is a very, very significant one. The area that I'm most familiar about has had a deficiency of family doctors now for some time. And this is showing up very strongly at Soldiers Memorial Hospital's ER and also at the Berwick Medical Center. Recently, in talking to one of the ERPs, one of the emergency room doctors, she is a lady from Windsor who travels to Middleton for a 12-hour shift in the ER. And she said her common experience now in seeing 40 to 50 patients on her shift is to have 40 to 50% who do not have a family doctor. So we know that this is a much more expensive way to treat patients. And again, it's a rotation of doctors that, in fact, can be providing the medical help, the medical assistance to these patients. Another area that hopefully can be part of the new med students, I guess, planning perhaps a little bit further out and long range, is having some of these students also specialize, along with family medicine, into geriatric medicine. We have now a number of communities in the valley that have 20 to 25% of their population who are 65 and over. And we know that population, that cohort, has special medical needs, and geriatric physicians can provide the specialty area that they are in need of, and especially around medications that they may have been accumulating over a period of time, And so this would be another area that could definitely help rural Nova Scotia and our small towns. We've heard on many occasions in this House the member from Digby Annapolis talk about lack of physicians in his area. And he himself, he doesn't talk about this I guess, personally, but I asked him today if I could use him as an example. He is on the long list of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 patients in the Digby area that does not have a family doctor. The member from Digby Annapolis would love to be going to a family doctor, but he is without one. So this bill and the initiative that we're seeing here in the House is a wonderful step forward. It really is, I think, a great insurance program for rural Nova Scotia, and there's no question that really it's a part of what we would call good public policy. And I guess the Liberal goal here is to see the 10 become 15, become 20, and the next generation of doctors trained in Nova Scotia, Nova Scotians, supported with their tuition, will go back to these rural communities. So that will go a long way, I think, in helping the recruitment of doctors, which has been very troublesome for our province. And there are many things around recruitment that I still think we could be doing in this province. Doctors have graduated, from Nova Scotia, now have, friends and associates who are practicing in other places and who have probably perhaps tried on a number of communities. And sometimes that personal invite can be a factor in recruitment. Also, of real interest is the number of Nova Scotia students currently at med schools in the Caribbean. And 2 or 3 of these schools do have a very, very strong reputation. These students first have to get past their American medical exams and do intern work here in Canada, and then have to apply as well to the Canadian board to get their medical certification. But we're talking the member from Annapolis and I. We identified between the two of us 10 people currently, 10 young students in the Caribbean who were unable to get into Dalhousie. In fact, 4 of them were sons or daughters of doctors. And let's hope we can get them back here to Nova Scotia. The minister announced a number of good initiatives that are currently in place. Remuneration program for rural doctors is an excellent piece. The alternate payment, the expansion of the collaborative practice. These are all very, very good initiatives, but I think there is none as strong as targeting Nova Scotia students by the announcement and by the intent that we had brought forward with Bill 119. And I would just like to end off by saying that I don't think there is any greater investment that the province can be making than in having family physicians for all Nova Scotians. We know the percentage is very, very good, but we know there are some communities now whose quality, our citizens here in Nova Scotia, whose quality of life is impacted by not having a family physician. When we have areas such as Digby area with 3,000-4,000 patients, or 3,000 or 4,000 people who are not patients of family doctors, that is indeed very, very troublesome. In my area, the military, in fact, has been so concerned that they are now building an off-base clinic. They will do their own recruiting, and it's going to be not just good for the families of military personnel, but second in line is they are willing to take on retired military people in our community that do not have a family doctor, and a family doctor can usually take around 2,000 to 2,500 patients and look after them well, and they would even then extend the third line would be people from the local community who don't have a family doctor. So that's another positive initiative, because as I started to say, the investment in family physicians, going to your family doctor who knows your history, who quickly identifies changes, whether they be small or large, that are happening to your health, is one of the, I think, the greatest preventive measures that we can often be given. Advice that we can take with us as a patient, make the necessary changes, go to another consult, get the kind of test or exam that we need. So today's announcement, Mr. Speaker, is indeed a very, very positive one, and I think will have long-range, good impact on the health and well-being of Nova Scotians. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my place.
Thank you. Time allotted for debate on Bill number 119 has expired. Chair now recognizes the Honourable House Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would you please call resolution number 2082?
Resolution 2082, the Honourable Member from Richmond.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today to speak on resolution 2082, and I'll read the resolution first. It says, whereas it has become increasingly evident that the Premier does not understand the problems that Nova Scotians face with skyrocketing gas prices, whereas recently the Premier encouraged people to make use of a transit system or buy a fuel-efficient vehicle as a quick fix, not comprehending the fact that transit systems do not service many parts of this province and not everyone can afford to buy a new fuel-efficient vehicle. And whereas an outstanding majority of comments on a Chronicle Herald story this weekend mirrored the thoughts of most Nova Scotians, informing him that maybe he should practice what he preaches and take the bus back to Mabou. Therefore, be it resolved that the Premier become more in tune with the people of this province and develop a plan that helps all Nova Scotians battle the ever-rising price of gas. Well, Mr. Speaker, how timely to speak on this resolution when one sees the continued high cost of gas here in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, this resolution, there are so many different aspects of it that one could talk about. And I know that the story in the Herald said Premier says take the bus, and I know the Premier took exception to that and said, well, I didn't say take the bus, I just said you should use the bus more often. Well, in essence, he said take the bus. And as we all know, Mr. Speaker, in so many of our ridings, there is no bus system. If I'm going to have seniors in Richmond County wait by the side of the road for a bus to pick them up, they're going to be waiting there a long time. There is some hope coming for the residents of Richmond and the Strait with the new Strait area transit system that's getting up and running, but again, we have a long ways to go. So, Speaker, one of the issues which we have continually raised is the issue of gas regulation. Now, Mr. Speaker, let me make something clear. Do we want to see a system that would assist rural gas dealers be able to be competitive and not be squeezed out by large suppliers? There's no doubt. But does regulation work in its current form? I believe it doesn't. And, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to watch this government defend gas regulation and watch the Minister of Service Nova Scotia defend it, because we all know that prior to the 2006 election, and we can go through Hansard, we can go through the media, but the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, the Minister of Economic Development, the member for Cumberland North, are all on record saying how regulation is not the answer for Nova Scotians. So we all remember that. So they started off opposed to regulation. The NDP have always been in support of it, even though the member from Halifax Fairview would now have us believe that his party is not married to gas regulation. They were the ones who initially proposed gas regulation. So now, once again, they wish to run away from it because it doesn't seem to be producing the results that they would like. No surprise. But, Mr. Speaker, we have said all along that we need to try to find something to help our rural retailers, but at the same time, putting in regulation has not worked. Has it worked in other provinces? No, it hasn't. So what were the three official things that gas regulation was going to do? Price stability. It was going to mean, what was the other thing? Less closures, and I can't even remember the third. Nova Scotians always felt the third was going to be lower prices, but we all know that that hasn't been the case. So, price stability. The numbers, Mr. Speaker, speak for themselves. In 2002, there were 35 price changes in Nova Scotia throughout the year. 2003 was 60 times. 2004, it was 50 times. The NDP and the government said that's too many changes. Under the competitive market, that's too much change. There's no stability. So we have regulation now that gives us a change almost every week. Well, there's a new price set every week. Technically, it could be the same price 2 weeks, but we have up to 52 price changes a year. So in 2004, when 50 times was too much, we've now put in a system that guarantees, for the most part, 52 changes a year. So it didn't do price stability. Second of all, I know the member from Halifax Fairview said that the price is set and that's it. He should know that that's not true. When the price is set, especially here in Halifax, there's a maximum amount and a minimum amount. And what usually happens here in Metro is that the first day it's announced, it's usually at midnight, Thursday night, or 12 a.m. Friday morning, and that day, here in Metro, for the most part, they go with that maximum price. And then by the end of the day, or the next day, they drop back down to the standard price. So that's not stability. It's not a set price, because even that price is changing under regulation. So that hasn't worked. So the other thing we're being told is that it stopped the closure of rural gas stations. I only wish, Mr. Speaker, that it had achieved that. I wish that I could stand in my place and say if there's one thing regulation's done, it has stopped the closure of rural gas stations across Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the numbers from the Minister's own department tell us that is not true. And we knew that wasn't true because when we looked at PEI, it showed that under a competitive market, Nova Scotia had lost the same percentage of gas stations to closure as what there was in PEI under a regulated market. So we already knew from PEI, regulation does not stop gas station closures, especially in rural communities. So, Mr. Speaker, what do the numbers tell us? As of June 1st, 2007, the difference from October 2006, there were 16 closures in Nova Scotia, and there were 10 openings. So that was for year one. Now, when we look from June 1st, 2007 to April 1st, 2008, Mr. Speaker, we see 17 closed. 17 gas stations under regulation have now closed in our province, and a mere 9 have opened. So, Mr. Speaker, it's failed. You know, the member from Halifax Fairview can say the review of 6 months was too early. It's not too early. The proof is there that it's not working because, Mr. Speaker, rural gas stations are closing because of rural depopulation. And regulation will do absolutely nothing to keep people in Richmond County, to keep people in Yarmouth, to keep people in Sydney, or to keep people anywhere else around rural Nova Scotia. For the most part, we know Metro is growing. So it's not that much of an issue here in Metro, but it's certainly an issue back home. The last census figures, when you look at the population decline in areas such as Richmond, Inverness, and Guysborough, and Victoria counties, we got a serious problem. Gas stations are closing because the people are gone. And regulation does absolutely nothing for it. Regulation is an excuse for us not to look at rural depopulation. It's a way for us to say, no, it's because of big oil companies that these gas stations are closing, and that's why we need to put in regulation to protect them. Pay no attention to the fact that Nova Scotians are leaving rural Nova Scotia in droves. Mr. Speaker, that is what we should be debating here today, is how can we keep our communities vibrant, how can we keep them stable, and that is what's going to be of real assistance, Mr. Speaker, to our rural gas dealers. Speaker, there's no doubt, again, as I said, that we'd all love to see our rural gas stations stay open. I'd love to see all of my convenience stores in Richmond County stay open and all of the small businesses that exist in my riding open. But, Mr. Speaker, for a government that has said it wants to cut red tape, it put in a system of gas regulation which is all about more red tape. So, again, that flies a bit into what the government has been saying. So that is why that we have called upon the government to reduce the motor fuel tax. They've done it in PEI, they've done it in New Brunswick, and it hasn't been the end of the world. Now, the member from Halifax Fairview, when he spoke last week, said, how irresponsible of the Liberals to suggest you can cut the motor fuel tax and not say where you're going to find the money. Yet is the party that had the issue a few years ago of nursing homes no longer charging people from their assets, which cost millions of dollars out of the provincial treasury, never indicated where that money would come from. This is the party that also wanted an 8% cut in home heating oil and home heating costs, $75 million or more, never said where that money should come from, and yet they throw the criticism at us. I think it's a hollow argument, and I think that speaks for itself, and I think members deep down know that it doesn't hold much weight to make that argument. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians are looking for a break, and I'm pleased that our leader in our party has been trying to find ways of making us more competitive. We cannot continue as a province with NSBI or economic development trying to bring companies here to Nova Scotia when New Brunswick, right across the border, has seen a difference in gas prices of 9 to 10 cents. That's not sustainable. Who is going to come to Nova Scotia when they know they can save that much more money if they locate in New Brunswick, if their business requires them to do a significant amount of traveling at all? So, Mr. Speaker, again, we have to do something as a province to provide and make it affordable for Nova Scotians to be able to continue to drive. It's not an option, it's not a luxury. In many areas of this province, it's a necessity. They need government action, and we're looking for that, and all members, I would hope, would support that effort. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to rise today and talk for a few minutes about rising energy prices. I want to, before I begin sort of the comments that I've prepared, I just want a couple of issues that the honourable member mentioned about gas regulation. And it's a fact, prior to regulation, we were losing about 8 rural gas stations a month. And I'm sorry, about 3 a month, and since regulation, we're losing about 1 a month. So it is a noticeable difference, and it has, you can take it any way you want it, but the rate of closures has slowed down, and I appreciate that, nobody there to buy the gas station, not going to buy oil, stay open, but when you, the issue with gas regulation in Nova Scotia was in many ways protect the margins for rural retailers who were being squeezed, and that's been done. It was also to prevent the number of price changes that were happening, sometimes once or twice a day, and that has been done. If you remember, Mr. Speaker, when we began, brought in gas regulation, we were changing the prices every 2 weeks, well, if they needed to be changed. But there is an interrupter clause there, but you also remember is that after we'd been in regulation only about 6 months, at the urging of the Liberal caucus, we had an external review done. The external review said it was really too early to do the review, but they did it anyway. And one of the things they did recommend is that the system of regulation go to a weekly price setting. So we accepted the advice of Gardner Penfold, and we did that. Then I want to comment, Mr. Speaker. We talked about Prince Edward Island being regular, which is regulated, but they did cut their motor fuel taxes. And I just want to draw to the attention of the House that my understanding is that the budget that was tabled by the Minister of Finance in Prince Edward Island this year had a $35 million deficit. And Mr. Speaker, and if you look at the issue of New Brunswick, and it is kind of a matter of choices. In Nova Scotia, one of the things we opted for was to try and help people with home heat. And I think the programs that we have put in place have been good ones. The issue of gasoline, there's no question, I'd love to be able to stand up here and say I'm going to take the tax off of gasoline, but the fact is that you have to make choices, and the amount of money people will stand up on the opposite side of the house every day and rail on us about the roads. And to be quite frank, I mean, despite my colleague who says that I do know that the roads in this province, some of them need some work. Not very many, but some do. Particularly ones, anyway. Some do. Well, there's one or two over in Pictou West, I know, that could stand a little bit of work. But up in Richmond County, I thought they were all okay. But anyway, and the fact is that we didn't remove the tax. We made the choice to keep the tax and put more money into the roads. The second thing, which the honourable member talked about trade differences and companies locating in Nova Scotia, and it doesn't come up on the floor of the House, but the price of diesel is also regulated in Nova Scotia and these other provinces. And if you want to go back, and I will challenge you to come in and bring it in the floor of this House and see the difference in diesel prices between Nova Scotia and the other three Atlantic provinces, we have had a 5, 6, 7, 8 cent advantage over them for the best part of 2 years. So the diesel in Nova Scotia, which is the commercial thing, has, under our system, has been noticeably different than it was in the other three provinces that are located. Now, you don't talk about that because I guess you don't drive a diesel, but I can tell you that my wife has a diesel automobile, and she does remind me of that, about the price of diesel going up too. But anyway, there are certain things. What I'm saying is that he is only talking about half the story. But anyway, now I'm going to get into my text. Well, I could do that, but this subject of another time. Anyway, rising energy costs, Mr. Speaker, whether it's electricity, propane, gasoline, or diesel, is one of the great challenges facing North America. The industrialized nations across the globe are coming to grips with a new energy reality. And to be quite frank, Mr. Speaker, the days of cheap energy are gone. They're gone, whether we like it or not. They're gone. And this isn't something that's happening only in Canada or in Nova Scotia. It's affecting everybody, no matter where they live. For example, I was talking to the member from Digby today, and I asked him about the fishing down in Digby, and he said, well, fishermen are being challenged now by the increase in fuel prices. I talked to the fishermen on the North Shore. They're being challenged. Everybody's being challenged by the increase in fuel prices. But, we aren't increasing the fuel prices here in Nova Scotia. I mean, the fuel market's determined in New York. And unfortunately, we can't influence that. It's a world market. And, the fact of the matter is that we've got China and India being industrialized, and they want the oil. And I can give you an example, I guess. I don't know how it works, but the commodity markets, but somebody told me that yesterday on eBay, there was a pair of tickets to the Canada-U.S. hockey game for $600. They went on eBay for $600. But somebody wanted them real badly. So they came along and they offered $700. And that is one of the things that is happening to the world petroleum market, is that the futures, people are coming and they are saying it may be worth only X, but country Y is willing to pay Z for it. And therefore, I am going to bid for this because I can sell it to them. It's a market-driven thing. Look, I want to tell you, to be quite frank, I was in here yesterday, and I really shouldn't say this in as much as I'm on camera, but I might have enjoyed the game a little bit more than being in here yesterday because they tell me it's not so. Anyway, no, I didn't. It was I did see the last couple minutes of it, and I was very delighted and was surprised that we should do a resolution, the House, congratulating Canada for beating the U.S. game. I can honestly say, Mr. Speaker, I've seen 3 really exciting sporting events in my life, and I can remember it was about 4 or 5 years ago, the World Junior Hockey Championships, which were held here in Halifax, and Canada and U.S. played on New Year's Eve, and the Premier, the Minister of Economic Development, and myself were privileged to be there for that, and I don't think I've ever seen a building that alive in an athletic arena in my life. So I expect if yesterday was like that, we all missed something. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, since World War II, Mr. Speaker, North America, primarily the United States, has been the largest consumer of and customer for energy to support its economy. And in the past, the advantage of being the biggest consumer of oil was the ability to help to control price. Therefore, it was cheap energy that spurred the tremendous economic expansion of North America. However, Mr. Speaker, the world has changed significantly since the 1950s, and energy markets and the demand for energy has changed dramatically in the past 25 years. And I will reiterate what I said earlier. North America now competes with the most populated country in the world, China, for its oil and other petroleum products. In addition, the Russian economy is opening up. India is experiencing a boom in its economy. And all of these nations now compete with North America to buy energy in all of its forms, but especially oil and gas. Mr. Speaker, this is the driving force behind the increasing global demand and the rising cost of energy. No individual country, be it the United States, which has the most powerful economy, or China, which has the largest population, is able to control or prevent the rising cost of oil and gas. Mr. Speaker, we recognize and appreciate the impact that rising energy costs are having on the day-to-day lives of Nova Scotia. However, this is the new reality of the times in which we live, and it requires all of us to think about the choices that we make. In the budget, Mr. Speaker,
Order, please.
we introduced
Order, please. That concludes the member's time allowed. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Richmond for bringing this resolution forward because, of course, let me say right off the top that we agree with it because we too believe that the Premier is out of touch with the needs of the people of Nova Scotia. Now, the regrettable incident with the helicopter, Mr. Speaker, some would say that that's a small thing, but I think was it the New Glasgow Evening News or was it the Pictou paper that had a very good editorial on this? It was about the symbolism of it, really, is the issue, is that when ordinary Nova Scotians have a jammed schedule, sometimes they have to just make a choice. They have to sometimes say no. But when our Premier has a jammed schedule, he just hops in a helicopter, which is funded by the taxpayers. And I think what really got to people was the symbolism of it all, not to mention the fact that it wasn't just the Premier. I think people are forgetting that it wasn't just the Premier in the Cabinet who in the last year took the Department of Natural Resources helicopter. One Cabinet Minister, as I recall, took it from Point Pleasant Park in Halifax up to his constituency. I haven't heard the reason for that, but I'm sure it was a good one. And another minister took it from Halifax way down to the southern end of the province to his constituency, and I haven't heard the reason for that one, but I'm sure it was a good one. So it's not just the Premier that was doing it. Then there was this misquotation, this widely spread misquotation about taking the bus. Now, I readily agree the Premier didn't say that. I actually heard the words he actually used, and I believe I'm right in saying that he said that Nova Scotians should take advantage of public transit, or words very similar to that. And he took exception to that being paraphrased as take the bus. But the resolution on its own terms we can agree with. The difficulty we have, Mr. Speaker, is where the Liberal Party goes with this, because they go to two places. One is that regulation is bad and must be repealed, and then they go to cutting gas taxes, Mr. Speaker. Now, let's talk first of all about regulation. When the government are on the topic of regulation, they blame regulation for the price of gasoline. But of course, Mr. Speaker, regulation is not responsible for the price of gas, far from it. Despite what the member for Richmond says, the system of regulation has more or less achieved its objectives, and the only way that the member for Richmond is able to paint the system as not having achieved its objectives is by misquoting other people, including me, as he did in his speech. So he sets up something that I never said and then says, well, that's wrong. He also selectively misquotes the Gardner-Pinfield report because, for example, one of the things that report says is that undoubtedly regulation has had a positive effect on the closure of rural gas stations, but the Liberals choose to leave that out. But, Mr. Speaker, in a way, it doesn't really matter what we say, because we're not the only ones who are just fed up with the Liberal position on this. I have here an article, a very recent article, Mr. Speaker, from the Amherst Daily News, which I want to table for the benefit of the Liberal Party. But I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs from it first. It says, quote, "The Secretary-Treasurer of the Nova Scotia Independent Gas Retailers Association is challenging Liberal leader Stephen McNeil to debate the merits of gas price regulation. Quote, I would challenge Mr. McNeil to a debate anytime, anywhere about regulation. Pettigrew said Sunday, we have among the lowest gas prices in Canada before taxes. It's not because of regulation that prices are high. End quote. So I would invite the leader of the Liberal Party, if he truly believes his position, to accept this challenge to debate the Secretary-Treasurer of the Nova Scotia Independent Gas Retailers Association in public, on the record, about whether high gas prices are caused by gas regulation or not. I challenge that leader to take up this challenge to a debate. Now, of course, what the retail gasoline dealers want everybody to know, Mr. Speaker, and here's another document that I'll table, is that in fact, under regulation, on average, prices in Nova Scotia have been consistently lower than the rest of Canada, whereas before regulation they were consistently higher. But this is the kind of data, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal Party doesn't want to hear. They only want to cite material that supports their already stated position, a position they took before regulation was put in place. So they have a political stake now in trying to persuade people that they were right, regardless of what the data actually says. So I will table that for the benefit of the Liberal Party, and this article from the Amherst Daily News as well. Because, Mr. Speaker, the retail gas dealers' data shows that as of yesterday, the before-tax price in Halifax was 88.3 cents per litre. In Moncton, it was 90.7 cents per litre. The national average was 92.0 cents per litre, and in Prince Edward Island, it was 93.2 cents per litre. So Nova Scotia's price is lower than the price in the rest of Canada, lower than Prince Edward Island, lower than New Brunswick. It can't be the fault of regulation, and it just isn't. So let's turn then, Mr. Speaker, to this question of the gas tax, because the Liberals, once they leave aside their arguments about regulation, then turn to the gas tax and say they would cut the gas tax. And in fact, their cousins in New Brunswick did exactly that. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table this article. It is from the CBC News website from October 3rd, 2006. New Brunswick Liberals cut gas tax on first day in office, first day in power. Good for them. They promised it during the election campaign. Their first day in office, they cut the gas tax by 3.8 cents per litre. Mr. Speaker, but here, Mr. Speaker, is the part that the Nova Scotia Liberals always leave out. And that is, from the same website, March 13th, 2007, New Brunswick budget brings tax hikes, Mr. Speaker. The budget that was delivered only a few months after the drop in the gas taxes raised New Brunswick taxes by more than $100 million. It also increased the province's debt by $356 million. Personal income taxes went up $50 million, Mr. Speaker, which all by itself dwarfed the impact of the cut in gas taxes. And as if that weren't enough, the New Brunswick Liberals raised corporate and small business taxes by another $52 million, Mr. Speaker. And I'll table that, Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of the Liberals because, Mr. Speaker, as I was saying just the other day, and have time enough to repeat today, there are a few immutable laws of public finance. If you're going to blow a hole in your revenues, you've got to make it up somehow. You have to either run a deficit or find a new revenue source or cut services. There are no other choices. Those are your choices. And we know very clearly what choice the New Brunswick Liberal Party made is they cut gas taxes and then within months turned around and raised everybody's taxes across the board by over $100 million because they had to make up for the revenue shortfall, Mr. Speaker. And in addition to that, they plunged New Brunswick deeper into debt, Mr. Speaker, just like the Prince Edward Island Liberals who have just finished delivering a deficit budget, Mr. Speaker. A deficit budget from the Prince Edward Island Liberals. So now we know how Liberal math works, Mr. Speaker. They say they would cut the gas tax, but what they don't say is which ones are going to be. Are they going to run us into deficit? Are they going to raise revenue somewhere else? Or are they going to cut services? And I look forward, Mr. Speaker, during the next 10 minutes to hearing the Liberal answer to that question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened with great enthusiasm to my honourable colleague from the NDP as he went on about all the examples of increased taxes in other provinces and all the other things. And, you know, at the time when this regulation was put in place, we've got numbers which I don't have with me today. We'll table them another day that when you track the cost of gasoline between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, gasoline prices are always higher in Nova Scotia. So you can go on with all the rhetoric you want and whatever you want to say, but the facts are the facts, and those are the facts. So when you talk about these things, the NDP must be nervous about us now because they're starting to attack us. So once someone starts to attack you, you understand that they're worried, and they should be worried. They absolutely should be worried. Here's the party that will spend us to death, that will unionize everything in this country, and then come back and tax us to death. You only got to look in BC, Ontario, and every other place that the NDP government has been in place and see what happened to most all those governments that were NDP. The people threw them out after one term. Unfortunately, in the meantime, it had an extremely negative impact to those provinces' economies. And the economy suffered and suffered and suffered. Now, I don't agree with what the Tories do most of the time, needless to say, but at least they have some things that they do on a regular basis that I'll give them credit for. But I'm afraid, you know, you hear the stories about the NDP, all these wonderful things they're going to do. And one of the ministers said today in government, he said, you know, it's always yes. Anything you want done, the NDP will do. Don't matter what it is. You know, if you want some more people hired to do this, you do this, and want someone else to do this, and someone else to do this, and well, they never talk about taxes going up, but the taxes are going up. And with them, we got an example. The member that was just speaking, indicated that the cure to fixing the tire problem in Nova Scotia recycling was to add cost to taxes, charge people more for the collection of tires. And you know what? That's where these guys are coming from. More taxes, more taxes, more taxes. So they talk about in New Brunswick government what they do. They didn't ask us what we will do. There's a big difference. Anyway, with that, I would like to turn the rest of my time over to an honourable colleague.
Thank you. The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise with regards to the discussion at hand. And prior to going into the specifics of the motion, I do note that in the course of the debate, the Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview had his own observations around what he deemed to be, excessive or unfair, and his interpretation of words of other members of the House, specifically to the Premier's response, which was dealing with a very serious matter and how to look at alternative forms of transportation that this government has invested in and previously had. I don't think, Mr. Speaker, when Cape Breton University was looking at providing greater accessibility for students and also dealing with the desire to reduce greenhouse gases and going and looking to the province for support to buy 2 transport buses for that community to be a negative investment by this government, but this government has 2 vehicles with Cape Breton University logos proudly displayed on them as in the transit system that are there to help that university, but also provide greater accessibility, Mr. Speaker, and also recognize that, yes, energy pressures are upon us, and government has been dealing responsibly in that, and it means about finding the appropriate balance. And Mr. Speaker, not only that, working with the university to have appropriate transit transfer station in place. All of those are constructive things. When I look at the federal provincial initiatives, Mr. Speaker, to provide resources to provinces, I also look, and it was too bad when they were doing it back in the Paul Martin days, I do believe, when they were trying to deal with it and look at the transit dollars and how it was transferred. Unfortunately, when the NDP were looking to provide support to that federal government, they also at the same time provide a caveat in that limits the ability to support a municipality out of the fund that's for Nova Scotia for those dollars. And I'll be happy to get further details of the result of that discussion. So again, some of their cousins have to look at the implication on non-metropolitan but urban areas at the same time and what that results in. But what I'm coming to, Mr. Speaker, is not everything is based on one perspective of Nova Scotia. When it comes to trying to administer and operate a government to deal with the economy and the diversity of that, but also the diversity of our constituencies, I do take exception, Mr. Speaker, for the member for Halifax Fairview to talk and try to make some illusion of irresponsibility and excessive use. I think before he talked about jet fuel being used for a helicopter and the like by the Premier. Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you, as a member of this government, I indeed have travelled for the business of the people of this province to rural areas, and yes, I have done it on a helicopter. Mr. Speaker, I've done it with a chartered aircraft that I've done to do business as a member of this government. But I don't think, if we're going to have a debate, let's debate where we are, and it is about the choices. If we want to reduce fees or taxes in one area, and we know that we have a legislative responsibility to go against immediately to all the benefit from that to our roads and our infrastructure associated with that, then there's choices that are to be made. And what they're not talking about, and the Honourable Member didn't say, is what he would cut to give. And that's the thing that we have to deal with in being responsible. What we're going to cut. But then to try and use, which I consider far-fetched scenarios with regards to excessive uses and almost to suggest abuses of a means of transportation. Well, I can tell you that it's an affront if he stands and says that that's the NDP's view, then it's very much against Cape Breton, against rural Nova Scotia. I do believe, Mr. Speaker, and I know, and I think of when we, as members of this House, I think of when we had the tar ponds announcement. I know that when we traveled down to that announcement, the most expeditious way when the House was in session to go there, we traveled with a chartered aircraft down there, and we traveled back. And on that plane were representatives of the Conservative Party, of the Liberal Party, and the New Democratic Party. And the point is, Mr. Speaker, I never looked at that to be excessive or inappropriate at all. I don't believe that if his own leader deems, as the leader of the official opposition, that he wants to take a charter as the leader of the official opposition or any other leader. if they want to be able to travel to do the business of doing their duties and obligation, if that means that they have to charter to do that, I'm not sitting here counting the liters of jet fuel going into a plane that his own leader would use. I don't think that's constructive. I don't think it's constructive to talk about the fact that when we have a premier of the province of Nova Scotia who's proudly from a rural region of this province, if you're from a rural region in this province, Mr. Speaker, you know. You know and you're conscious of the challenges and the restrictions. And it's easy for someone to say, well, you have to make choices and say no. So do you make choices to say no to your constituents, that you should not be in your constituency to represent them and to do business for them, such as the Cape Breton Business Partnership, Mr. Speaker? Is it right to say no to your obligations in the capital district, the capital region being the HRM, which we're very proud of? A beacon, as we celebrate and was indicated, the seat of representative government in this country. I don't look at it as a negative. It is a reality. And if we're going to have a debate, then maybe we should talk about the reality and the choices that have to be made to do that. And when we talk about gas regulation, Mr. Speaker, it's about pacing and understanding, indeed, where the measures are in place so Nova Scotians can appropriately deal with their affairs, doing it in a responsible manner, not having the day-to-day spikes that people were concerned about. People, Mr. Speaker, in doing it. But if we're going to sit in the House and start attacking what is legitimate